Thank you.
Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise to speak to this government notice of motion concerning the 2012-13 alterations to appropriations for officers of Parliament and the 2013-14 appropriations for those same bodies. Mr Speaker, these three offices, the Office of the Auditor-General, the Office of the Ombudsman and the Office of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, are three of the checks and balances against the ultimate power of the executive. They are three of the things that continue to make New Zealand one of the most transparent democracies in the world. They are three of the reasons why we continue to feature very highly in Transparency International's assessment of transparency and accountability mechanisms in developed democracies, or in any democracy, because those countries which do not have democracy or any of democracy's apparatus are always ranked at the very bottom of Transparency International's ledger. So this motion from the government today is important for a number of reasons. It focuses the fact that these officers account to Parliament. They don't account to ministers. They are not the creatures of ministerial portfolios. They are officers of Parliament, and they report back to Parliament. So the government does not own them. Parliament decides on the appropriation for them, and the officers' appropriations are determined by a multi-party committee in this House. Mr Speaker, it might be appropriate for us to reflect on why the appropriations have needed increasing in this next round, the 2013-2014 appropriation. There are two possible reasons. One is that our citizens have become more actively engaged with the processes to which they are subjected. And why do people become more actively engaged in the processes that affect them? Well, this brings me to my second point. If the processes are seen to be unfair, are felt to be unfair, are felt to have been inadequately addressed or inappropriately executed, then these officers provide, particularly the Ombudsman's Office, provides a venue, some recourse that an ordinary citizen might have to get those complaints or differences addressed. Mr Speaker, the Office of the Auditor-General is critically important for being there as a check against the behaviour of a whole range of bodies, including local authorities. The Ombudsman's Office is there for particular purposes, especially in relation to the enactment of regulations and legislation. And the Ombudsman's Office is often the last port of call for a citizen who has a dispute over just how a regulation has been implemented, and the previous speaker referred to the plumbers and gas fitters as a prime example, and so it is. And the fact that their work has been increasing could lead us to conclude that there have been more infringements of regulations and the implementation of legislation in recent times, or a greater disregard of citizens' rights in the carrying out of current legislation and regulation. And so I am pleased that there's an increase of staffing for the Office of the Ombudsman. But I want to turn particularly to the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. This office was set up under the Environment Act in 1986. Its roots lay in the 1980s reforms of this country's environmental administration, following an OECD report of 1981 called Environmental Policies in New Zealand. and this report recommended changes, including strengthening the environmental advice to government and establishing an environmental body with separate audit and oversight function. And those functions of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment have included reviewing the system of agencies and processes set up by government to manage the country's resources and report to the House of Representatives. Again, I state my previous point, Mr. Speaker. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment reports to Parliament, does not report to government. Government has its own agenda, and that is cutting a swathe through environmental legislation as we speak. However, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment stands independent of that of any government's program. But my point here, Mr. Speaker, in that with the increase for the funding of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, that is an additional $100,000 in the annual appropriation and subsequent years, largely to accommodate the cost pressures on the office's operating budget. While that is a very good thing, it needs to be borne in mind that the work of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment is increasing. And why is it increasing? Again, two reasons. We have a more engaged citizenry who care about the environment and want independent advice, not simply party lines about how well we're doing in the environment or how poorly we're doing with our environment and our natural resources. So we have engagement of people of all ages up and down this country on issues of environmental resources, and they require more information. We laud the fact that science is making more and more of an impact on policy decision-making, Mr. Speaker, but it seems to me that in the area for the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment that she oversees, there will always be the need for more science as more and more issues come to the fore. A few years ago, we wouldn't have had a report on fracking. Now we've had one, and we are awaiting the second. And why we are awaiting the second is because there haven't been enough resources for the Parliamentary Commissioner to expedite that second report as quickly as she would have liked. She has produced reports on wild and scenic rivers. She has produced a report most recently, as she does on endangered species from time to time, and she has done on marine mammals, but most recently on longfin eels. She has produced reports on water quality and the marine environment. There is any number of reporting measures that the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment undertakes on behalf of natural resources and our husbanding of natural resources in this country, Mr. Speaker. And so Labor welcomes the fact that the baseline appropriation is to increase by $100,000 per annum. But I would suggest also, and I would like to say it on the record here, Mr. Speaker, that we need to be constantly vigilant about what is going on outside of this parliamentary environment that requires additional resourcing to the Office of Auditor General, to the Office of the Ombudsman in addressing complaints, and to the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. If we do not keep pace with the kind of funding they require, their ability to act independently of any party in this House will be eroded. Mr. Speaker, I support and endorse the recommendations of this motion.
Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Green Party supports the government notice of motion for alteration